The following content is provided under a Creative Commons license. Your support will help MIT OpenCourseware continue to offer high-quality educational resources for free. To make a donation or to view additional materials from hundreds of MIT courses, visit MIT OpenCourseware at ocw.mit.edu.
Okay, so today I'll talk about Coinjoin, signature aggregation, before that, privacy. But privacy, Coinjoin, CoinShuffle, signature aggregation, and how these all connect. It's a little bit of a leap to put these both in the same class, but not really. They're connected, but they are somewhat separate things. Today, we'll talk about privacy, Coinjoin, and various ways to do that, and then aggregate signatures, so Schnorr multi-signatures, and then aggregation and attacks on this system. Okay, so the idea is privacy. And there's a bunch of terms we can use here, like anonymity and fungibility. And whatever the term for this, I don't need any, because I have nothing to hide. So I don't need any privacy, I don't need any anonymity. I'm a good person, I don't break the law, I'm a boring guy, I don't do anything crazy. I'm joking, but no, I'm not joking about being boring and not doing anything crazy. That is actually pretty true. I mostly just work on this stuff. But yeah, that's a fairly common thing that people say. And the sort of clearest example is if you don't have anything to hide, you don't have any Bitcoin. Because like literally, if you don't hide your private key, someone will just immediately take your Bitcoin. So you do have secrets, right? Your secret is your private key and your password. And if Bitcoin and these types of systems really take off, potentially most of your money and a lot of your wealth could be tied up in what is, a secret. So if you're not able to keep your secrets, you could lose a lot of money. And larger, like I sort of think that going forward, this is very sort of thought leadery, future kind of thing, but going forward, it seems like sort of all you have is your secrets. To the extent that you can own anything, the thing that you really have control over, like, okay, I've got these things in my head that no one else knows. And I might not, maybe I own my car, but that's also sort of property rights and legal systems, and maybe it can get repossessed. Maybe I own this land, but again, that's sort of this thing with the state. But I definitely really have the stuff in my head. And I can at least, try to keep that. So even if you think you have nothing to hide, you do have your private keys to hide. And that's sort of the obvious one. But larger, you want privacy because in general, you don't want to reveal stuff about your coins. This is, specific to Bitcoin, but like my philosophy is I generally don't want to reveal stuff ever. And a lot of times at stores, I remember like Radio Shack when it was still a thing and I was in like high school. They would always ask you your phone number when you bought anything. And when I was little, I would just tell them my parents' phone number at my house because, like, I don't know, they asked. But then once I was in like college, I was like, wait, no, I'm just going to make something up. And now I do that all the time. And it sometimes gets annoying for other people because I would like go to a restaurant, they ask, I put my name down, I'll say I'm Fred. And then my other friend comes and she was like, wait, you're not listed. Like, and then she put her name in. I'm like, no, I'm already there. I'm Fred. And, like confusing things like that. And I hope and I sort of think that we're starting to see this kind of thing. Like there's like Facebook hearings now. And people are all shocked that like the company Facebook can read everyone's messages and see everything. Well, yeah, that's how it works, right? You're giving it all to their servers. So I think it's starting to be like where before companies would all be like, we just want to get all the user data possible. Hopefully going forward, data will be seen more as a liability and less as an asset. We're not there yet, right? Because the companies who get sort of hacked and lose all this user data don't really get punished. So like the Equifax thing and like all these different data breaches, there's not a ton of consequences yet. Maybe there will be in the future and maybe companies will start to like not want all this data. But it's not as clean cut as like, well, I didn't do anything wrong, so I don't want to hide anything. Sort of default hide is my stance. And there's so many conflicting interests where every time you're on the websites, it's like this website wants your location, and you're like, wait, how do I always disable that? I don't know the settings. But everyone wants this stuff. So Another reason, especially, specifically in the case of money, is what's called fungibility. And sounds like a weird word. It just means that every Bitcoin is the same, or every dollar is the same, right? So dollars are fungible in that, physically, okay, this $20 bill and this $20 bill are worth the same, and different denominations. So I will give you a 20 for 2 10s, and anyone will do that. They're worth the same. You don't have sort of, well, this dollar's not worth quite as much. And sometimes that happens, right? Even with dollar bills. Like when in other countries, when the new $100, I think in the Philippines, when the new $100 bills were issued that have the like little blue shiny thing, people didn't like them. And people were like, no, I won't trade my old $100 bill for your new $100 bill. I don't trust this new one. Eventually they got used to it. But there's things that even money can be not fungible. But so the classic example is like, okay, gold is fungible, diamonds are not. Diamonds, I have little experience with diamonds. They seem kind of silly, but like they're all unique, right? They've got different grades and different cuts and different sizes and carats and little inclusions and imperfections. And you've got this whole industry where, people with these little eye things like look at the diamonds and figure out, oh, this is a good one, or this one's so-so. Whereas gold is, well, sort of also has assayists and good delivery standards and all these things for the gold bars, but it's much more of a standard, and there's no judgment call. It's like, okay, this is gold, it's 99.95% pure, it weighs this much, this is how much it's worth. And you can chop gold up and, okay, sorry. Divisibility is different than fungibility, right? So if diamonds were all identical but not divisible, they could still maybe function as money. You just need a lot of little diamonds. But the fact that gold's also divisible is a bonus. But the fungibility is really what's nice about it and what makes it sort of used as money. Currency's fungibility is actually, I'm not a lawyer, but I hang out with them. It's enforced by the law itself. So there's an interesting case, Crawford versus the Royal Bank in Scotland a couple hundred years ago, where there was a guy and he wrote his name on a 20-pound note. It's like, Crawford, this is his money. And I think he was trying to mail it to someone, he lost it. Years later, the note shows up at a bank, and he's like, no, see, that was my money, and I lost it. And he demands the money back, right? I lost that money, this is my property, give it back, it's got my name on it, I can prove it. And then the court says, no, that's not how money works, right? The bank has the money. You can't just write your name on money and then have it be yours, because, and this is very different from property, right? So if you steal a bicycle, and then you go sell it on, if someone steals a bicycle, sells it on Craigslist, and you buy it, and you didn't know, right? It's just whatever, some guy's selling a bike on Craigslist. The police show up and say, hey, that bicycle's stolen, we're taking it back. And you're like, well, I didn't know, I just bought it on Craigslist, I paid a couple $100. The police are like, sorry, we're taking, you're not in trouble, right? We're not gonna charge you with a crime, but these are stolen goods, we're taking them back, giving it to the rightful owner. And that's how the law works. You can try to complain about it, but they're taking it. Money's different, right? If you're running a pizza store, someone comes in, gives you a 20, buys a pizza, and then presumably eats it or whatever. And then a couple hours later, the police come in and say, hey, that guy stole that $20 bill. And we're taking it back and giving it to its rightful owner. As the shopkeeper, you're like, well, I don't even know which $20 bill, even though they're serial numbers. And the police could say, no, it was this $20 bill, we're taking it back, returning it to the person he stole it from. Legally, they can't do that, right? Yeah. But so this is from talking to lawyery people. So money's different. Money's not property in the same sense. And the fungibility is enforced by the state. And it's also enforced, the divisibility and fungibility are enforced by the banks in that, like, the US dollar isn't like worth anything in that the government and the banks don't have to give you anything for a dollar. Like they used to sort of have this agreement where, okay, you give us, was it $25, $35 and we'll give you an ounce of gold. That agreement no longer is in place, but they do have to give you change, right? So they do have a duty where if you have a bunch of old beat up $20 bills, the bank sort of does have to honor those and give you new $20 bills. And that's one of the things that the Bureau of Engraving and Printing and the Fed, they all have this system. So they maintain the currency in that sense. So there's all these things that like you don't really think about in that how money operates, but fungibility, divisibility, those are like really important. And most of it is enforced by the legal system. Bitcoin does not have these legal protections. You want Bitcoin to work even where it's not legally recognized as being money. And our goal is to make it like money. So yeah, if there's stolen Bitcoins and you can trace them, the law enforcement could say, no, those Bitcoins are stolen. We're recovering them. So it's not treated as a currency. It's also not treated as fungible, right? So in the absence of these sort of protections from the legal system, the software needs to help enforce the fungibility and divisibility of these things, right? So you can sort of treat the Bitcoin software and rule set as a sort of it's not a legal system, but it's a system of rules that governs how the Bitcoin transactions work. And so the fungibility is got to be in the system, right? So gold, for example, they don't have, they might. I don't want to say they don't have rules about gold. There's probably all sorts of old laws about gold. But you don't really need a law enforcing the fungibility of gold in that you can sort of melt it down and it's untraceable, right? If you have this old gold coin from this empire and this other gold coin from this empire, and you melt the gold, you put it into a new coin, no one can tell. So similarly, Bitcoin needs to enforce fungibility that way. Okay, so any questions so far about these definitions or objections? I don't think Bitcoin should be fungible. Yeah.
Is Bitcoin, so would you say Bitcoin's more, I guess it's more like gold than diamonds, but
yeah, but
in a
it's
sense, like right after your transaction happens, the probability that so say it's only one block deep. I mean, I don't think it's actually treated this way, but someone could potentially say, oh, well, I'll just consider that 90% of one Bitcoin because probability or whatever the probability is.
In that they're not valued the same because they haven't been fully confirmed.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, no, that's an interesting way to look at it. I mean, I'm not talking about sort of the time-based things here, because I guess in many cases you say, okay, well, I'm gonna wait a day. And if it's got 100 confirmations, it's good, right? I'll consider it fully valued. But yeah, there could be things where you look at the probability of a double spend and then sort of assign value to it increasing as time passes or something. That's sort of a unique thing to Bitcoin where the transfers, the sort of finality of the transfer increases with time, which is not really the case with like gold or dollars where like, okay, I got it. Like the fact that I've had it for 1 minute or 10 minutes doesn't really change that I've got it. So yeah, that's an interesting point. Not really addressing it here. I'm sort of, in this conversation, just assume you wait a day, and then all the probability of it going back is sort of negligible. But it's more the fungibility in that, like, you can trace where it came from, and so assign values to different coins based on that. Got it? Okay. So there's a real-world example of this. I don't want to name specific names, but customer buys some coins. You go to exchange, you send them a couple $100. You say, I want to buy some Bitcoins. And the customer buys the Bitcoins and then transfers the coins to a betting shop, a betting company in the UK, and bets on a soccer game, for example. And he wins. Great. So he bought a coin, sent it over to this UK gambling company, bet on a soccer game or football, I guess they call it, wins. Now he has 2 coins. Transfers those 2 coins back to the US exchange, and he wants to sell them. Before he can click sell, his account is closed. And the exchange website says, nope, you violated our terms of service. We're closing your account. Take your Bitcoins, we've sent all your dollars back to your bank. Withdraw your Bitcoins. We're out. This happens. So this is a problem. I mean, whether you agree with gambling being legal, so in the UK, however, there's no law violated, right? And as a United States, so this is sort of a gray area. I'm pretty sure that if I'm a US citizen, I take a plane over to London, I go to I don't know the lingo, punter shop, betting shop, yeah. There's also, and then I bet on something and I win, well, I'm pretty sure I have to pay capital gains on those winnings to the US IRS, but I haven't broken a law, right? Because I'm not in the US when I'm doing this thing. So similarly, how, if casino gambling is illegal in Massachusetts, sort of, I can go to Las Vegas, I can gamble, and I can come back to the Massachusetts, and it's okay. So this is, probably a gray area. I don't know if there's actual court cases about this where you're still sitting in Massachusetts at your computer, but you've sent your money to the United Kingdom. I don't know. I don't know of anyone who's gotten in trouble for this. I don't know if there's been prosecution like against UK betting shops for this kind of thing. But this happens. A lot of companies run betting shops like this. But I have seen that US exchanges will shut down accounts because of this. And they say, look, you can buy Bitcoins, but if you're using these to gamble, we don't want to get involved. It's just more risk for us. And so they close the accounts. So the problem here is, wait, what did I say next? Yeah, what's from the perspective of like the legal system, for the user it's obviously a problem because it's annoying. What's the problem for Bitcoin here? Why should Bitcoin care about this? Like as people working on Bitcoin, why do I care? Okay.
Two reasons. It's the usability of Bitcoin, that Bitcoin is not usable at all. Debt's public and private. So that's the difference between fiat currencies.
Right.
They can be like government, state backed. But two is then what happens to these two Bitcoins?
Right.
Do they just get burned? They're suspended until there's some decision as to what to happen with these two Bitcoins.
In this case,
owned by the exchange.
they give them back. But yeah, the real thing is these two Bitcoins are sort of worth less than two other Bitcoins. Right? Now you've got a sort of different value for these, where these two Bitcoins are hot and I need to, get rid of them and launder them or something, right?
That happens with $100 bills too.
Really? Like,
Yeah.
Oh, okay, well.
It's a suitcase full of them in Bogota.
Oh, okay, yeah, I guess. If you have a suitcase full of hundreds and you just walk to the Bank of America and say, here, I want to deposit this, probably you've got some problems.
Might give somebody 1% to launder into the banking system.
Okay.
To move it from fiat to digital.
Okay.
Digital fiat.
Yeah, like actual physical currency notes.
That's called money laundering.
Right. So this now you've got this sort of money laundering that now people are going to try to do using Bitcoin. It'd be preferable if it was, so the way that they can tell about this is that people reuse addresses. Bitcoin is not inherently as fungible as, say, gold or even dollar bills have these serial numbers, right? And I don't know to what extent people track these things, but Bitcoins are much more like the dollar bills with serial numbers. And it's all on the internet, it's all on the computer, so it's really easy to track things this way.
But the person who had the two Bitcoins could just simply transfer them to a new address, and no one would know it was still him. It was spent, or
Yes and no, right? So you say, okay, the Bitcoins are, I'm at the exchange. They've got a giant pool of addresses. I transfer to, the casino. And then the casino, in many of these cases, reuses addresses extensively. So it's really easy to see that this is the casino. And then from the casino goes to the exchange again. Exchange flags that and says, hey, no, we know where this came from. Instead, you say, okay, I go to user A, and then I go to the exchange. In some cases, that might, if their algorithm is, hey, just look at where it came from, sure. But if you say, wait, there was one output, this transaction is one input, one output. So we know exactly where it came from. You can trace it back that way. So it depends. The coin's being worth less, this is unmoney-like. And since legal tender is a whole other thing, and I'm pretty sure Bitcoin will never be legal tender anywhere in terms of like debts can be settled. But at least fungibility, we want that. So if we want to make Bitcoin more money-like, how do we fix this? The first and simplest and possibly the biggest is address reuse. So if the casino keeps using the same address over and over, it's really obvious. And so things like vanity addresses. So a lot of them will use vanity addresses. A vanity address is when you continually perform computations to try to get a human-readable address. Right, the addresses are random numbers. So for example, I taint rich. So Greg Maxwell has this address, which is 1G Maxwell BO8MDX. So you can see that the first part of that address is G Maxwell. And you get that just by continually attempting millions and millions or billions of different keys and seeing which turn into the address you want. So people do that. People spend a lot of resources on making cool addresses, and then the casino can say, okay, this is my address. But that really hurts the fungibility and privacy, because now it's clear when a customer sends to that address, everyone in the world can see. Yeah.
Does the casino just do this because it's like cool instead of like having any? Because it's not like it's easier to type in because you have a lot of other.
You still have the
brands.
stuff at the end.
Yeah.
I don't. It's branding, vanity address. It looks cool, I guess. But yeah, like Satoshi Dice does this too, right? Or did. So Satoshi Dice addresses, Satoshi Dice spending, yeah, it always starts with 1 dice, 9, 1 dice. So like, branding, I guess, makes it easier it does make it easier for people to recognize, and if they have a list of the addresses, they're like, oh, that's the casino address, I want to deposit to the casino, and just copy and paste that in there. So like, it does help usability, and that's one of the issues in Bitcoin. It's like having these giant, ugly addresses that you have to get right and not send to the wrong one. It's not a great user experience kind of thing. So I can see that vanity addresses do improve the user experience a little bit, but it really hurts the privacy of the system. So an address reuse is a problem because people keep using it. It looks cool. Also, web explorers enforce this a lot. Like, so if you look at, if you just look at blockchain.info, right, you'll have it. Yeah, this is advanced mode, enable, disable, I don't know. Even with advanced mode, yeah, okay, it'll give you a link to the output, so no one's going to click that. Anyway, so the idea is, this shows, oh, here's a transaction. It's coming from 2 addresses, sending to 2 addresses. And it even gives you a helpful, hey, this is Greg Maxwell, right? And I'll give you a link to, I don't know, where does this link go? I don't know if I should, you're being redirected. Okay, well, go for it. Gmex, okay, so it's Greg's little account on Bitcoin Talk. Interesting. But so this is, you guys know enough about this system now that this is not true, right? If you click on an address, and now it gives you all the transactions, way too many, that were involved in this. But if you click on a transaction, it's not spending from addresses and to addresses. It's spending from transaction outputs and spending to addresses that can later be consumed. So the way that web explorers, and it'll show a balance, right? If I clicked on an address, it says, hey, here's the number of transactions involved, here's the final balance, and you can look at the current balance and things like that. But that's not actually how the system works, and it hurts privacy and fungibility to have this idea of, oh, this is sort of my account, and it's got a balance that can increase and decrease, because then that implies that I'm going to keep using it. Whereas really, if they're one-time use, that really makes it harder to trace things. Okay, so another aspect that hurts this, if you want to trace things. So if it's 1 input, 1 output, right here, it's real easy. But even if it's not 1 input, 1 output, so for example, imagine a transaction where the input has 10 coins in it. There's output A, which is 1 coin, output B, which is 8.9997 coins. Which do you think is the change address? Right, they're all different addresses, but 8.997, right? I mean, it's okay. Whoever's doing this, they're sending 1 coin, and the remainder minus the fee is this. So it's often pretty clear, even though looking at it, all the addresses are different. Okay, are any of these change addresses? Is it just A sending to B and C? Is it A sending to B and back to A? Often it's pretty easy to figure out, and you're guessing, but you can get the guessing pretty good. Okay, so what we're going to talk about now, anonymity sets. So Bitcoin is not actually anonymous, right? There are sort of identities attached to these things in that you have addresses. The addresses are not your name, but you can think of them as a pseudonym, right? And you can create a bunch of pseudonyms. But there are these keys. There are these publicly known addresses. And so we want to expand an anonymity set. And so the idea of an anonymity set is how many possible different identities could be the owner of these coins. And the idea of expanding your anonymity set, so even if Bitcoin were perfectly anonymous in terms of the anonymity set was everyone who had Bitcoin, that's still actually not that many people. So if you see a Bitcoin, you're like, well, I don't know who owns it, but I know that the person who owns it owns Bitcoin. And actually, there's not that many people who own Bitcoin. So I've just eliminated 99% of the people, my suspects, right? just by doing that. So just having more people using Bitcoin makes it more anonymous in that sense, right? If it's very niche kind of thing, and then the police say, okay, well, whoever did this crime, they're a Bitcoin user. Well, now you can find there's not that many Bitcoin users. So you want to try to increase your anonymity set for a specific transaction. Okay, so the traditional, I don't want to say traditional, the way you do this is basically money laundering. It's a Bitcoin mixer. And these mixers still exist, I'm pretty sure, right? Do you know? They're still around. They're still around. I don't know why. But a lot of times they use Tor. Well, I mean, I know why, but it's like there's so many better ways to do this. So you've got coins at address A. And you say, OK, I'm going to send 10 coins to the mixer, which has address B. And then later, some different, not from that output, but somewhere else in this sort of giant mixer account, 4 coins get sent to address C, and 6 coins to address D. So you've now, you basically pool all the coins into this mixer, which uses lots of different addresses, and then split it up over time, different amounts, and it gets really hard to figure out where the coins came from. So your anonymity set is bigger. The problem is mixers work well. Potential anonymity set is all the other users of the mixer if it's well designed. The problem, the mixers disappear with everyone's money very consistently. The mixers are certainly not publicly regulated companies. I'm pretty sure you couldn't do that. So they're just sort of these anonymous, like, hey, I'm a mixer, Bitcoin Cloud or Bitcoin Fog or whatever. And a lot of times they're on Tor, so you don't even know where the mixer exists. And you just sort of hope for the best and send your money in. Yeah.
Do they take a transaction fee?
Yeah, some of them take fees. The big fee is when they keep all your money and don't give it back. But yeah, a lot of times they will take a small cut. But it's not actually hard to run. The cost is pretty minimal in that you need some kind of Tor service, and then you just have some software that just runs this and allows deposits and withdrawals. The conference in Puerto Rico, Financial Cryptos, there was a talk about what was the word they used? Not traceable, a reputable, a mixer that you could prove defrauded you, right? So you had, you could have these proofs that like, oh, I can prove that they stole my coins, which is, I don't know, I thought it was kind of useless because the whole idea is they're anonymous and maybe you can prove that they ripped you off, but they still ripped you off. Okay, so then the better idea than a mixer is I Taint Rich was a blog post from Greg, that's why I've got this up, in 2013, and it was kind of fun. Ever since I was a wee lad, I had a dream of being incorrectly assessed as impossibly rich by brain-dead automated analysis. Now with your help, I can be. So he wanted to mix inputs from different people within the same transaction. So you could have 2 different people in the same transaction. And in Bitcoin, this is secure because the signature signs the whole transaction. So you say, okay, I'm user A. I have my 10 coin input. I'll match up with user B, who's got his 2 coin input. And we both sign this whole transaction, which sends 2 coins to C and 10 coins to D. So now you can't trace where these coins went, right? Well, you sort of can, but if you just look at the graph of transactions, it's not as obvious. So the first transaction is really fun. I remember seeing this. So there's 3 inputs, 40,000 bitcoins, 0.1337 bitcoins, and 1 bitcoin from Greg's, and then 40,000 and 31337, and then 0.82. For some reason, it was even more like, yeah, 40,000 bitcoins is pretty good today. It was no less impressive at the time in 2013, even though I guess it was only worth about $500,000 at that time. But it was like, it was pretty cool. And then Greg was like, wow, I've never seen that much money. Loaded. So the guy who posted the 40,000 coins, he's called Loaded. And nobody knows who he is, but he shows up from time to time and has a lot of money. And so yeah, then Greg, made a transaction with Loaded. I've handled press the assets before. The most I've ever had to move on a single key press. So very cool. So it's pretty cool. You can now, you can put, this was very manual, right? That was on a message board, sort of goofing around. But there's no risk. You're not sending money to someone and then getting it back. You're just saying, I'll sign off on this transaction. And then transactions are atomic, right? You can't say, oh, I'm going to cut off this bottom part and only have 10 coins go in and 2 coins come out, right? The whole transaction is the thing that gets signed. Okay, so what's the problem with this model? Any way to get a mapping from C and D to A and B? There's one really obvious one on this screen. It's an X, right? Yeah, well, gee, I think it's A goes to D and B goes to C because the amounts are completely different. And actually, we'll talk about amounts next week, but yeah, so how about this? Well, you've got 10 coins coming in, 2 coins coming in here, and now I've got address C, D, E, and F, 1, 7, 1, and 3. Better, maybe? No. Nice try. You can still easily, right? The 7 goes to the 10, the 7 and 3, the 1 and 1. There's no, I don't think there's any way it could be anything else, yeah. How about this? Address C has 2 coins, address D has 2 coins, address E has 8 coins. Well, now that actually works, right? It's not clear if C is from A or B. Same with D, right? These two have some anonymity in that you're not sure which user it's from. E, on the other hand, is obviously from A. But B's coins are now sort of the anonymity set has doubled, right? You don't know whether it's C or D, right? B's address is now unclear. So that's kind of cool. How do we, scale this? Well, have more users and a bigger anonymity set. So one issue with this is the users, as you scale to more users, let's say you do 10 different users, where they all put in their inputs, they all put in their set of outputs, and now you've got this big transaction where they can it's hard to tell what the mapping is. The problem is you gain numbers of inputs, numbers of users. The users themselves know the mapping, right? Because someone's actually doing I put in my thing, I put in yours. So there's a user that knows the mapping, and they can leak that info, and that hurts the anonymity, right? So maybe just the transaction graph itself won't tell you, but somebody knows, and they can reveal that at a later date. So that's not good. So there's a really cool protocol called coin shuffle. So pre-coinjoin messaging to shuffle the inputs and outputs. And this allows you to have 10, 20, 30 different people doing it, and if at least 2 participants are honest, then the mapping cannot be determined. The way it works, this is super quick because I don't have a ton of time. Everyone has their inputs, right, that they want to put into the transaction. And they also have the output addresses that they want as their outputs. So they make a new set of public keys that they're not going to use on Bitcoin at all, right? They're just making public keys for encryption purposes for this game. And they also tell everyone, here's my inputs, right? My input is A, my input is B. So the inputs are publicly known, or not publicly, to the people participating. And then the idea is, okay, I know everyone's public key that they've given. So I encrypt my output. So I've got an input, I told everyone. I've got my output, and I encrypt that, the address itself and the amount, with everyone's public keys sequentially. So for example, I use encryption on key C to encrypt the thing on encryption on key B, encrypt the encryption on key A of my output, and then I hand this to user A. Okay, so this is like onion routing, sort of onion encryption, where you take a plain text, encrypt it again, encrypt it again. So I receive these encrypted outputs. I shuffle them, right? I receive one from A, one from B, one from C. I receive the whole set. I shuffle the order, and then I use my key to decrypt one layer, right? It's still going to be encrypted because I just see here's a bunch of encrypted data. I decrypt it. It's still encrypted with the next person's key, and then I hand it to them, and they shuffle and decrypt. So the final user gets the outputs, and the final user, so in this case user C, can decrypt, and now he's got my output, but it's shuffled around with everyone else's output at every step of the way. So they can't tell who's went to whom, and then they have this final transaction which has all the outputs in some random order because everyone contributed to randomizing the order of the outputs. So this is really cool. As long as two parties are honest. If there's only one honest party, it doesn't work because then every dishonest party colludes and says, well, you know, we know everything but the honest party's output, so we can figure out which one it is. But if there's two users, then you can't determine, two users actually doing this, then you can't determine the ordering. So that's pretty cool. I think it's being used for join market. They use something like this. I don't know. So there's like cool techniques for this kind of thing. Okay, real world though. Some people use this, right? Join market exists. I don't know how popular it is. Problem, which people use this? Who uses this? It's got a limited anonymity set of the people who really want anonymity, which is not the anonymity set the people who want anonymity want. Which is kind of confusing, but the idea is I don't want to just be in this group of people who want anonymity because those are the people I don't want to be associated with. I would rather associate myself with the people who don't particularly want anonymity. This is a big problem, right? How do you, people don't care about privacy. People don't want to do these kinds of things. And this costs money too in this case. Like if you're doing these transactions, this isn't really a payment. This is just a superfluous transaction to churn your money around to get some more privacy. This is one of the big issues with, okay, we want anonymity, but if anonymity is opt-in, it's not very useful, right? Because then it's sort of like Tor, where if I'm using Tor, everyone's like, why are you using Tor? You know? And so, yeah, well, at this point, encryption is now sort of ubiquitous, and it's like the standard, but yeah.
So given the fact that most transactions happen on exchanges, why not just lobby a few exchanges to try and implement this?
Well, wait, most actual Bitcoin transactions are in and out from exchanges? I don't know.
If that's true.
There's a lot, but I don't know if it's majority. I think it's like a decent percentage, but I think it's less than half. But yeah, there's a lot. It'd be awesome. So exchanges are actually uniquely positioned where something like CoinShuffle, you could really easily do a like oblivious withdrawal, where you say, I want to withdraw my coins, and I'm not going to tell you where to, but I'll give you this encrypted thing that gets shuffled around with different users, and then at the end I sign off on it, and the exchange can say, well, we're fulfilling all our customers' withdrawals, but we don't know where the coins are going. You could totally do that. That's not a conversation that happens at any exchange, right? Yeah.
I also think that the bulk of exchanges are now getting caught up in some regulatory in Japan, soon to be in the US, for know your customer, anti-money laundering. So for the exchange business model, they're going to have to give, as Coinbase did to the FBI, some data.
Yeah, yeah. And whether that data is, here's this, you know, user's name and address, you know, his home address and his social security number, and here's what he bought and sold, versus does that also have, and here's where the addresses where he withdrew his coins to. That, you know, I don't think the IRS, like the IRS thing, I think it was mostly, we want to get people for not reporting their gains. I don't think it was,
The IRS wants.
Right.
The other part of the
Right, FinCEN, yeah.
Financial Crimes Unit.
Yeah.
FinCEN would want the addresses.
Right. FinCEN would want to map Bitcoin addresses to human names so they could see who did what. IRS just wants to know who sold and didn't report gains. By the way, this weekend, if you sold any coins last year, you gotta tell the IRS. I'm actually gonna pay a little bit of tax on that. So, yeah. So anonymity's tricky. Yeah, like you could try to go through exchanges. Probably not the best. It's just not, like, they're not going to do it. It's hard to do even research on this kind of stuff when you're a company. There's a lot of sort of chilling effects and stuff. That's sort of why I like working at MIT, in that if I want to research crazy anonymity stuff, totally fine. Whereas if I'm working at a VC-funded company in San Francisco, and I'm like, hey, we're making, you know, these anonymity protocols. Are you sure you want to do that? Like, it can be an awkward conversation in some cases. Okay, so yeah, people don't care about privacy. It's sort of an externality. if you say, well, I'm reusing addresses, but that only hurts my privacy, that's actually not true, right? In the simplest sense, you're reducing the anonymity set for everyone else, right? So if I have, if I say, okay, where are James's coins? Well, I know they're not at 1G Maxwell 909 because that's Greg Maxwell's coins. So it can't. So I'm, when you use publicly identifiable addresses and vanity addresses, you're actually reducing the anonymity set for everyone else. It's sort of an externality, where the people who say I don't care about privacy are not paying the cost of harming the people who do care about privacy. So this is a tricky problem, and the solution, there's no solution. But one cool thing, one way forward is, well, everyone likes cheaper transactions, right? Everyone likes saving money. So can we make it cheaper to improve anonymity? And so privacy and scalability, in some cases, are at odds, right? So in things like ring signatures, which is, maybe I don't think I have time to go, but Monero is a sort of privacy-focused currency that uses ring signatures, where you can point to, a ring signature is I can point to two public keys and say, okay, there's public key A and public key B. I'm signing message M on one of those two public keys, but I'm not telling you which. And you can verify that, okay, one of these keys signed, but I don't know which. And the signer had to have one of the private keys. Or both, right? It's easy to, if you have both keys, you can obviously make a ring signature. And it doesn't have to be two, it can be 5, 10, whatever. A bunch of, you pick a bunch of public keys, sign with one of them. So that's pretty cool. That expands the size of signatures, I believe, with like O of n. So if you have 10 keys you're pointing to, and you make a signature on one of them, the signature actually gets bigger. And so like for Monero, they use all these different systems, and scalability is one of the big problems with it's a problem with Bitcoin as well, it's a problem with everything, but it's even worse in Monero because of the choices and like the different algorithms they use. So in some cases, privacy and scalability are at odds. But in some cases, it works together, where you can say, look, we want to have less information about these transactions. So if you have less information to store, there's less information to link the users to their coins. Okay, so an idea here is aggregate signatures. So currently, when you sign, you have this input. You say, okay, here's users A's signature, here's users B's signature, and you're doing this like ineffective Coinjoin thing here. The goal would be, we want to aggregate these signatures. So we don't have a signature for this input. We just have a single signature on key C, which is just somehow the combination of A and B's signature. And then you can save space, because there's only one signature that stays the same size, but still prove that both A, so this is not a ring signature, right? This is, aggregate is A and B both signed and produced a single signature together. And that can validate the whole thing. Okay, so how can we make this signature? We know pub keys A and B. They're both signing the same message, which is really important. There's the terms for these things. There's like multi-signatures, aggregate signatures, key aggregation, and no one agrees on, I've had arguments, I've had discussions with people, and I'm like, wait, that's what you call it? I was calling it something else, and there's not really good terms for this. But in this case, what we want is, we're signing the same message, so that makes it easier, right? We're not trying to combine different messages, different signatures on different messages from different pub keys and combine it into the same signature. That's even harder, although that is possible in some ways. But in this case, A and B are signing the same message with their two different keys, and they need one signature, and the signature is going to be R and S, right? So the equation that we had, that we've done a couple times, the signature is K, some random number, minus the hash of the message, and K times G, R, times the private key. And to verify, R minus the hash of the message and R times the public key. Now, if you share the private keys with each other, it's kind of easy, right? You say, Alice just says, here's my key, Bob, and then the Bob can just compute everything. You can do that with ECDSA. But you really don't want to share private keys, because as soon as you give someone else your private key, maybe they don't sign this aggregate signature of the thing you want to sign, they sign something else, giving them all the money. So you want to be involved in this process. Okay, so the simplest sort of multi-signature system for Schnorr signatures. First, you want to share an R value. Right, so this R is also going to have contributions from both users, right? Who comes up with what here? If C is the combination of both Alice and Bob's public key, well, the message we have already agreed on, but this R value is the question. So the idea is Alice comes up with K sub A, computes R sub A, and gives it to Bob. Bob makes K sub B, computes R sub B, and gives that to Alice. Then both of them can say, okay, well, we know the real R that we're going to use for the signature is the sum of R sub A and R sub B. Then they want to compute their own S's. I don't know how to S. Yeah. So for Alice, S sub A is going to be equal to K sub A, that only she knows, right? She shared R sub A, but not K sub A with Bob, minus the hash of the message, and this aggregate, this summed R times her private key. For Bob, it's S sub B equals K sub B minus the hash of the message and R times little b. And then they give each other, or really, only one party needs to do this, right? Either Alice gives S sub A to Bob, or Bob gives S sub A to Alice, but they don't have to both do it. Because then the final step is you just add the S's, right? So this sum, this aggregate S is S sub A plus S sub B, which is K sub A plus K sub B minus the hash of M and R times A minus the hash of M and R times B, which is, you can call this K, right? That's the discrete log of R, because they summed it. And then you can factor out the A and B here. And so this is the sum of their private keys. This is the sum of their K values. And then this signal verification step will work. And that works. Awesome. Okay, questions about this? Basically makes sense. There's all sorts of minefield, caveat, sort of watch out things. For example, if they learn your K value, they will learn your private key once they get S. Normally you make deterministic K values where you compute K as like the hash of your message being signed and your private key. That's dangerous to do in this case because they might get a K value from you and then give you a different R value and get another K value and like find your private key. So there's all sorts of like watch out things. Okay, so the idea is, okay, now cool. We've got address, we've got output which needs a signature from A, we've got an output which needs a signature from B. We'll use those as inputs and just have this summed C signature. And that shows that both parties signed, right? So we're good. Now we have way less data, right? These signatures are like 60-something, 65 bytes. So instead of having it twice, you just have one that covers the whole transaction. Great. And it doesn't have to be two, right? You can see how this would extend to 3, 4, 5 different people. They would all have to compute their own K value, give it to everyone else. Everyone computes this combined R value, and then does their own S's, and then sums them all up. And this would work with any number of participants. Problem. You've got a bunch of coins, that 40,000 coins from before. And then one day you see, wait, I'm user A, user B came up with a user A and B signature and sent it all to address E. I'd never signed anything. I didn't do this process with him. How did he steal all my coins? This is bad. So any idea of how you could do this with the equations we? Okay, so what you do is you say, hey, here's key A on the network. And normally you see pub key hashes, but a lot of times you see pub keys. And anyway, you definitely see the pub key once people try to spend it. So maybe you have to do this quickly, but you can do this real quick. So you say, okay, I'm going to make Q a random private key, compute Q times G to be big Q, and then I'll compute key B, which is Q minus A. And then I will send some coins to B. And now note that I don't know the private key for B, right? The private key for B is going to be this little q minus little a. I don't know little a, so I don't know what little b is. But that's okay. So I don't send too many coins to key B. And anyway, I'll get them back. I don't know B, I can't sign with it. However, I want to spend from B and A together. I don't know little b, I don't know little a. I don't know the private key for either, but I do know the private key for both, which is sort of confusing. But the idea is, well, C is going to be A plus B, which is A plus Q minus A, which is just Q. Right? So in this case, I can observe a key, find, make this rogue key, and then spend from both of them without knowing the actual key that I wanted to steal from. So this is a huge problem, right? You can't have this. This would make signature aggregation completely insecure. What are some ideas of how to fix that? So the interesting thing is in all the literature about multi-signature, this problem sort of still persists. And the new papers about how to use this in Bitcoin are the ones that are actually addressing it. So the general idea was, well, make B sign, right? Make B prove that he actually can sign with key B. Before you start doing these things, have Alice and Bob talk to each other, and Bob says, okay, here's a signature with key B. And Alice says, okay, here's a signature with key A. And now you've proven that they actually can sign and they're not doing these kinds of rogue attacks, right? So that's the straightforward way to do it, right? Where, okay, if you don't know B and can't sign, we're not going to continue with this process. That's interactive, though. So, yeah, make B sign a message before combining keys. Easy. That's what people sort of thought about for years. But the whole point here is to aggregate signatures. And so if you require B to create a signature and post it into the transaction, you've just eliminated all the gains, all the space saving for this technique. So we can't have that. We want it to be non-interactive. We want any existing keys to be usable in this system without pre-committing to anything. You could also make it interactive where, well, anyway, so the better way to do it. You delinearize the signatures. So you redefine the signatures. You still send to, for example, key A or key B. Your outputs are still pub keys. But when you require a signature, you don't require a signature from that pub key. You require a signature from that pub key times the hash of that pub key. Right? So you say, okay, I'm sending to A, but when normally I have signature from key A. Instead I say, no, I want a signature from A times the hash of A. So anyone who knows the private key for A will know the private key for this because this is public, right? Everyone can see what the hash of A is. And then so it's just little a times the hash of little a. Right? You just this is a scalar multiplication, so the scalar multiplication works the same for the, this is the, the point multiplication, and it works the same for the scalar down here. So it doesn't hurt, it doesn't make it any harder to sign. You just have to perform a hash operation and a multiplication, which is quick. But what it does is it prevents this kind of attack. So instead of signing with A plus B, sign with A times the hash of A plus B times the hash of B. Since in this case, in Bitcoin, the public keys that you can see what public keys are being signed and aggregated. So you say, okay, well, I'm going to try to do this technique again. C is A times the hash of A plus B times the hash of B. The private key is going to be A times the hash of the pub key A plus little b times the hash of pub key big B. I know B, which is Q minus A. Or sorry, I don't know B. I know Q, right? And I constructed sort of this B is Q minus A, but I don't know it. So C is now going to be A times the hash of A plus Q minus A times the hash of Q minus A, right? That's what B is. I can't cancel out this little a anymore, right? Because it's got a different coefficient. Maybe it's easier if you sort of move them on the other side, right? I've now got these coefficients in front of my private keys that are not the same and won't cancel out anymore. Before, if assume before, it's the same, before the system is times 1, right? So the idea was A times 1 plus Q minus A times 1. Since the coefficients are the same, 1, I can factor them out and now, apply these and remove the A. So if the coefficients are the same, if it was a times the hash of a plus q minus a times the hash of a, I'm good. I can still factor out that coefficient and cancel out a. But now the coefficients are different, and so I can't do that subtraction, right? And now I'm stuck. I cannot sign with this little c just from knowing q. Questions about this? Yeah.
So how do you come up with q?
Oh, I mean, there is, in this attack, q is just any random number, right? But the idea is here, q being any random number doesn't help you, right? Because you've sent money to B, you're trying to sign with q minus a, but you don't actually know the private key q minus a. So you're stuck. I mean, even if you did in this case, it wouldn't help, right? Because you still have that a there. So this prevents that kind of straightforward attack. You can't get rid of the a times h, a term. This actually is not enough. There's a paper called Wagner's paper, some guy at California, UC Berkeley, I think, a generalized birthday problem. And it's a hard paper to read, but if you're working on these kinds of things, it's a good paper to read because it comes up again and again with these kinds of attacks. Collisions, did we talk about? I don't think we ever talked about. Okay, so the idea of colliding, for example, a hash function, or in this case, a public key, usually it takes half the work that you'd. The reason it's called like a birthday paradox is because do people know this birthday thing? Like, how many people need to be in a room before two people have the same birthday? And it's like 22 or something. It's like really low, and it's surprising because you'd think, well, maybe 365 divided by 2, so like 100, 180 or something. But it's actually 22, I think. Because of the way, like, for every new person added, there's a possibility they collide with every already existing person's birthday. And so the collisions are like more common than you think. So in the case of colliding a hash function, even if the hash function is 2 to the 256 bits, you only need 2 to the 128 attempts to collide and find two that are the same. And that's if you store all the old hashes. And so like keep coming up with new ones. After the square root of the number of attempts, you'll find it. And then there's some techniques with like cycle finding where you don't have to store them all, things like that. So usually you think, okay, 2 to the n over 2 time to find a collision. But that's a collision between two things. And Wagner's attack is sort of, find A and B such that A equals B, kind of the normal collision. Now, find A0, A1 up to AI. So find I things on this side and J things on this side, such as the sum of A equals the sum of B. And in the case of elliptic curve points, it would actually be the sum. You'd do addition. In the case of hashes, it might be XOR or some other operation. But the idea is if you have a lot of different things and you can pick and choose on both sides, you can potentially find collisions with much less time. And in the case of these elliptic curve points, it probably would be practical. You'd need, I don't know, dozens, 20, 30, 40 different keys. But you could potentially say, okay, there's a key with a lot of coins. I'm going to find a set of a whole bunch of keys such that I can cancel that key out, even with this multiplying by a different coefficient. Because I've got like so much search space. I can't, like, it's a cool paper. You should look through it if you're interested. But that's a problem. You can sort of make progress is the basic idea, is that I can keep getting closer and closer to canceling this thing out. So instead, we have this improved delinearization, and this is talked about in the MuSig paper from like January. You take the hash of all the keys concatenated together in some specified order, right? So you sort the keys some way, and you say, okay, Z is the hash of A and B, or if there's more keys, A and B and C, and just all concatenated. And then you sign with A times the hash of Z and a 0 plus B times the hash of Z and a 1. So you make the coefficients distinct, but you also make the coefficients commit to every single part of the set, right? Every key in the set needs to be in this coefficient. And the MuSig sort of explains why that works. So the attack, right, in this case is, well, I've got these different coefficients, right? But the coefficient here only depends on this key here. So maybe I can find a bunch of different keys with different coefficients such that these coefficients will cancel out. Or, these coefficients will sum or multiply, sum up to hash of A. So it seems like hard, right? I can't find different hashes that will equal the hash of A, right? That's a hash collision. But if I have any number of different things, I may be able to, right? And so the idea is if you do this, well, now every time I'm adding or removing a key from my attempt, I have to change Z. So I can't leave this here and start adding things and try to work on it that way, because every time I add a C or a D, Z changes. And so I have to start over from scratch. So anyway, that's my general intuition of how the delinearization works for MuSig. And then, yeah, it used to be like Z and then put A in here, because now that makes it unique. But you can actually just number them. You just need them to be distinct. And since it's a hash function, just say like 0, 1, 2, 3, 4 is good enough. Okay, any questions about this? I realize it's kind of complicated and the software is kind of crazy. But the idea is it prevents a bunch of these attacks so that you can securely use aggregate signatures. Questions? Hopefully, yeah, and you wouldn't have to program it. But yeah, so what you could do is you could say, okay, it saves space, right? I've got the first use case will be in single wallets, right? It's interactive, right? So you have to do that thing where I come up with different K values, I share the different R values, I come up with the S values, I add those up. Sure. If it's all doing it yourself, where it's just there happen to be two different pub keys that you control both of, you can basically skip all of that. And you can just say, no, I'm just gonna add the 2 points here, and I'll use the same K value, because it's just me. So this happens a lot in Bitcoin wallets, where you're making a transaction with multiple inputs. They're all controlled by you, but you might have 2 coins here and 3 coins there, and you want to send someone 4 coins. So you got to use both of these inputs. Currently in Bitcoin, you're going to have multiple signatures. With this new signature aggregation, you can say, okay, I'm picking these 2 inputs, I'm signing for all of them with a single signature. And in the case of it all being yours, you don't even have to do the 2 operations and add them, right? Because you know all the keys. So that's going to be the first use case. And that's much easier to program because it's all just within the same computer. And this is easy, so that's cool. And then a cooler use is, okay, use it with Coinjoin, where users A, B, C, and D all contribute, they all have an input with, hey, the same amount of coins, great. And they're doing coin shuffle to shuffle the order of these outputs. And so they know, so A knows, oh, mine is G, but I have no idea about E, F, and H. I don't know the mapping other than my own. But hey, my output is in there, cool. So whatever everyone else is doing, I don't care, but I'm good with this transaction. And they can contribute their own K value and their own S value. And then finally, you put the signature at the bottom, and it verifies that all these participants have signed. And this is really nice because it's smaller, right? It used to be, this would be, what, 250 bytes worth of signature data. Now it's just 65 bytes worth of signature data at the bottom. So you save on fees, you save on space. Everyone likes this. Yeah, it's cheaper than a solo transaction. And so that potentially helps scalability and privacy, in that if people say, I want to do something cheaply, I will connect to other people and aggregate my signature with theirs, and so we save some space and save some money. And maybe I don't really care about the anonymity thing. Maybe I'm entering into a transaction and there's some people doing shady deals in this transaction, but I don't care, right? My thing gets in and out and I save money. So the extension of this would be, what if you had just one giant transaction in every block, which is all the inputs and all the outputs, and there's a single signature? That would be really cool. there are techniques to do that. Maybe next time. So the issue is it's interactive, right? In that you have to know about all the other inputs and all the other outputs. So I can't, if it were non-interactive, then I could say, oh, well, there's this transaction where D is sending coins to H. And there's also this other transaction where C sends coins to G. And they've got their own signatures. If I can take those two, I'm not either of these people. I didn't do anything with these signatures. But if I could take those two things and combine the signature non-interactively, then I could just basically take all the transactions in my mempool, squish them into one transaction with one signature, and put that in my block. That would be really cool. But the issue there is, one, the signatures have to be interactive, and two, they're on different messages, right? So in the case of C sending to G, it's on a message of C to G. And in D sending to H, it's on that message. There are techniques, though. So BLS signatures, Bonnet, Lin, Shaham signatures, do allow you to do this. So non-interactive aggregation of the signatures, which would be really cool because then a block would only need one signature. And in BLS signatures themselves are a single point, not a point and a scalar. So that it would just be 32 bytes. Well, you'd probably use a different curve, but you'd have to. But yeah, the idea of having these tiny signatures that satisfy proof for the entire set is really cool. So this is a cool idea. So you're saying there isn't software? You said or that it's not on GitHub? Okay. Yeah. So the idea is there was a bunch of software for this that mostly SIPA. So SIPA, or Peter Wool is his name on the internet, is SIPA, and he told me what that stood for, and it was some super cheesy thing he made when he was in middle school. But anyway, he has been working on this kind of software. So has Greg, that guy who 5 years ago wrote about this stuff, and some other, and Andrew Polster. A couple people have been working on this. It's not publicly available code, which is kind of weird, but the reason is that they're working on Schnorr signatures and aggregation, and it was on GitHub in a branch of libsecp, the repo they're using it. And then all these altcoins were taking the code and putting it into their altcoins and saying, hey, we support Schnorr signatures. And so, for example, the rogue key attack, it was the simple version, which didn't have this multiply by the hash of the pub key. And they were like, wait, no, don't, we're working on this software, but we know all of these problems with it, right? You can't actually use this for signature aggregation. We're just sort of playing around and trying different things. And so they actually pulled it from GitHub. And so I've seen it. I can get you. Well,
Such the commit history.
You can see the old stuff.
From 3 years ago.
Yeah, the 3 years ago stuff that doesn't have any of this delinearization or this thing to prevent Wagners Attack. All of that stuff is not in there.
Perfect attack vector. You come up with something that sounds really cool, and you put out stuff the vulnerabilities to, and all the altcoins adopt it.
Well, no, that's not what they. So, okay, maybe that's a cool attack, but they were like, oh shoot, no, but it said in their repo, do not use this. This is research code. Do not use this in production. There are known vulnerabilities. But people are like, whatever. I'm just, people didn't care. Well, yeah, there's some esoteric edge case vulnerability, but I'm going to solve that because X, Y, Z. So they actually pulled the code. They are working on the code, and the code works. I've seen it, but they are very sort of we don't want to put it publicly until we're sort of saying, okay, here's our final version that we want to put in Bitcoin, because they know as soon as they sort of put it out there for review, all these altcoins will take. You've implemented this in. Yeah. Not in Vercoin, in cryptokernel. Yeah. So, and did you use the musig?
Well, I will do now.
Okay. Oh, okay, cool. Now you know. But yeah, so there's they know that people are going to use this because it's a cool signature scheme, and once you have, and I've talked about this multiple times before, once you have this Schnorr signature equation, there's all these other cool things you can do with your addresses and things like that. And so that's the idea here is scalability is one that, okay, now we can combine things, make it smaller, and also we can hopefully help privacy this way. In that people who are not particularly concerned with their anonymity will say, yeah, I still want to use it because I save, I can save $1 on fees. So yeah, I'll join this transaction with a bunch of other people. And then you've got the people who actually want anonymity are like, great, these are exactly the people I want to be associated with, the people who don't particularly care about anonymity. So seems like a win-win. Right now, all the software requires a regular old signature. So for example, if you have, if these are outputs that are currently being used, and you do this, I validate the output one at a time. And I say, okay, I'm looking at this output, looking at this input, there's no signature at all, fail. Okay, the whole transaction fails. So you need a new output type, which says, okay, I'm using this new aggregate signature, so actually look at all the inputs, don't validate them at all, and just validate at the end, at the bottom. So that's going to be some different code. And you can't retroactively say, okay, all the existing keys we can now spend, all the existing outputs we can now spend with this new signature scheme. You can't really do that. So we'll have to make new addresses, and the new addresses will be BC1Z instead of Q. I don't know, new address type. And then when you send to that, now you're allowed to spend from it using aggregate signatures. So all that software is mostly there, but it might take a while you got to get everyone on board. I'm curious to see what people will complain about. SegWit was a little bit more like, there's a lot to complain about, even though I don't like parts of SegWit. Not even there's a lot of parts I don't like and won't use. But this seems like a sort of clear win, where it's like, great, you can aggregate signatures, do all these cool things. I'm guessing there will be people saying this is bad, and saying like, no, because Satoshi's vision is one signature, one input. A blockchain is a coin is a chain of signatures, and this coin has no signatures. I'm guessing. I don't know what'll happen. Or maybe it might be smooth, and everyone's sort of like, yeah, this is obviously better. Great paper, great math, great idea. Let's get it, let's all activate it and use Bitcoin this way. Who knows? So we'll see. It's pretty cool software though, and you can use it in other projects, right? So crypto kernel is using Schnorr signatures. Probably a bunch of different coins who are sort of more agile in that it's easier to make changes will probably start using this. Ethereum's still ECDSA though, right?
No one is using this.
Yeah, no one's, there's no coins that are actually implementing this yet. Monero uses ED25519, which is essentially a Schnorr signature. And I think Ripple can use ED25519. So there's some different schemes that are more similar to this, but still don't have the definitions for aggregation. So anyway, so this is cool stuff. Next time I will talk about, next one I'm not looking forward to making the slides because it's like a really complicated one that I don't even understand. Like I sort of get it, but it's like, wait, how? Okay, but how to mix different amounts, right? So how to hide so the basic, in this case, hey, it's great. But in many cases you can see, right, I said the reason it doesn't work is because it's really obvious where the 10, okay, these are 10 and 2. But what if you could hide the amounts but still enforce that the amounts were correct? So that's the idea of confidential transactions, which we'll talk about next time. And then it leads to Mimblewimble, which is even more complicated. And I'm not going to promise that I'll explain the whole thing, but I'll touch on the ideas.